Welcome to part 2 on our work on the Mercedes ML320 1999, and we are up to dealing with the rear brakes. The first part of this I showed changing out the one horn. Now I'm on the same side of the car, the right hand side, changing the rear brakes and also rotating the tires. I already moved the one tire to the front, so when I finish the brake here, the second half of this side, the rotation will be done too. So just wanted to show you what I'm dealing with here. First of all, you can see just how scored, oops, well, my battery decided to quit on me, I guess. There we go. You can just see just how scored that rotor is. That's because the outside portion of this pad is ground down to just about nothing. So it absolutely had to be changed. I mean, there's no way around that. And typically, if I'm doing a brake job, I'll just do the rotors and the pads anyhow. Then I know I'm dealing with everything that's fresh. If the rotors aren't scored too badly, and you take it to a shop, they can, what they call, turn down the rotors. They put it on a lathe and they kind of resurface it so that you can get more use out of them. But they're becoming more throwaway items than they used to be. I mean, since everything's gone to disc brakes now, so I've never worried about that, at least not since I've been doing my own brake work. I just replace the rotors when I do the pads and I know I'm good. So I've got to take the caliper off here, and that's got 2 bolts in the back there. Let's see, I don't know if you can see that here. Right there is one on the top, and then there's one on the bottom. And then I'll have to take the bracket that the caliper sits in here. That also has 2 bolts, I believe. Typically they do. I got to check and see. And then I have to pull the rotor off. Now this one, some of the rotors just slip right over the hub. Others have a little screw that holds them in place. And this one, it looks like we've got a Torx head there that I'll have to use to loosen it so that I can get the old rotor off. This one might be a little tricky. I'm going to spray some WD-40 around there now. Sometimes they're kind of rusted fast, and it's difficult to get them off. I've in the past had to use a sledgehammer sometimes to loosen them up to get the rust off. That's the rust that's in between the back side of this and then the front side of the spindle underneath it, the hub underneath it. So I'll see what I need to do, but I will try to pre-lubricate that so that it's not as difficult when I get to that point. But the first thing I want to do is take the caliper off and then take the bracket off before I can take the rotor off. So that's the attack plan, and I will come back to you when the next phase is done. Thank you for watching. Alright, we are progressing here. Now, just a couple things to update you. I had one little surprise here. Most of the other brakes I've done, this bracket here that the caliper sits on top of that holds the rotor assembly, usually that releases too with 2 bolts, so that you're basically left with your rotor and your spindle. But on this, in the rears here in this Mercedes, this is one piece. This connects up to the rest of the frame there, the rest of the wheel assembly. I didn't know that. It's my inexperience. The front ones weren't like that. I had to pull that piece off too, but here it was a little bit different just because, let me see if I can pull some of these old parts up here for you. The brake pads, and this was the better of the 2, you can see the kind of shape there, and this is the inside one. These prongs on there actually stick into the piston here. This is the piston on the caliper, and I'll explain what we're going to do with that in a second. But it fits into there, and then, if I can reach this, sorry about jiggling around here. The outside pad, and this was the bad one, you can see it's ground down to nothing, actually fits on here like this, and it clips backwards. There we go. Because I have this is upside down. I have this rotated upside down. So it fits in here and it clips over these ears on the caliper. rather than attaching to the cradle that holds the rotor in place. So that's a little different than I'm used to. Again, I'm not a mechanic by trade. I'm not an expert, and this is the first time I've replaced rear brakes on this Mercedes. So this is a little different. The other thing that surprised me a little bit, because this didn't come off, well, what was here to make sure the caliper or the rotor stays in place, and that was this little bracket here. It just attaches with 2 bolts right onto, oops, have it backwards. There we go, it goes in like that. It just attaches there to hold the rotor in place. So that's actually easier of a job because I don't have to take this whole assembly off and put it back on. It's just take this little piece off. And the Mercedes engineers were smart in how they designed this, because the 2 bolts that hold this are 13 millimeter, which is the exact same size as the long bolts that hold the caliper in place through the pistons here, or through the the retractors there. So only needed 1 socket, and they weren't that tight to get off, surprisingly. So so that made it simpler than having to do what I would normally do. I'd have one size set of bolts here and then a different size from this bracket that would have to come off. So now the other thing that we need to do here before I've got to get the rotor off yet. I have a lot of WD-40 sprayed on to try to get it loosened up. It is on tight, so I may have to get the sledgehammer out to persuade that old one to come off. But the other thing that we need to do to make it easier to and possible to put the new pads in. Remember, the new pads were worn down to nothing, so their thickness from here to the piston was much less than what the new ones are going to be, because the new ones have the full thickness of the brake pad. So what we have to do is push this piston back into the housing here of the caliper, so that you can put the new pads in with ease and then fit them down over the new rotor when we get to that point. And this is why we take the lid, the cap off the master cylinder, because as we push on this, that's going to force hydraulic fluid back through the line, and it'll push back that way, which is okay, like I said, as long as it isn't under pressure. Because of the cap being on, you're not fighting it. This piston should move fairly simply. And how do we do that? Well, there is this handy dandy little tool, this piston pusher, and this is a real cheapie. You can get much more expensive ones. For some bigger vehicles, there might be 2 pistons on the brakes, and you can get a larger one that has 2 of these pushers on. I just got the cheapie because the amount that I do this, if I was a mechanic, I'd have bought a better one, but just the amount I do it, it's not necessary. So this just basically fits in like this. I have to turn it out here. It's the way it was from the last time I pushed the piston back in. It fits in here like this, and you just turn it until you push the piston back in. Now, to make things a little easier, what I will usually do, since the opening there for that piston is fairly large, and it's bigger than the head on that piston pusher, this just turns in like this, and the force pushes it in. What I'll do is I'll get a larger, older socket, and I'll stick that in first, so I've got that extra length pushing, so I don't have to turn this as far. And then I also have a heavier duty object that's pushing the piston in, so it's more even than this little cheapy thing I have here. Like I said, this little head on this. So it makes it go a little easier and faster by doing it that way. You just have to remember, of course, take the socket back out when you're done. Not a big deal. So that's going to be my next move while I'm still waiting for the WD-40 to give me a little help getting that rotor off. I'm going to push that piston back all the way in so it's ready to go to put the new pads on. I won't put them on yet until I get the rotor off, because I'm going to be doing some banging around, so there's no sense having the new pads in my way here while I'm working. Sometimes it takes a lot of grunt work and muscle to get these loose. I mean, I had one minivan one time that my middle son and I think took like half hour, 45 minutes of just banging with a sledgehammer and banging with it till we finally got it to release, and that was because the rotors hadn't been changed in that minivan in several years. So hopefully that won't be the case here, but that's the next step. I'll push the piston in and get this old rotor off, and then we will start to put new stuff back together. All right, stay tuned. All right, after a little bit of persuasion and quite a bit of WD-40, as you can see, I did manage to get the old rotor off. There it is. You can see the amount of rust that's on it. One of the other things you run into with the rear brakes as far as getting these rotors off is you're also sometimes fighting the tension from the emergency brake. Here and underneath is another brake like that. The emergency brakes are almost like the old style of drum brakes, where the braking power happened not with a caliper pinching a rotor like that to slow the car down, but the expansion of these, what they were called brake shoes, up against the inside of the rotor or the hub, would cause that friction, and then that would slow the vehicle down. The emergency brake, of course, you typically only use when you're stopped. So when you step on the emergency brake pedal, or you have a lever, depending what kind of vehicle you have, it extends this forward, or outward, top and bottom, to pinch the inside of the rotor surface to hold the wheel in place. It's very much like the old drum brakes were in that. And I do believe with some vehicles, in an emergency situation, you can slow down at least your vehicle, if not stop it, by using your emergency brake. If for some reason you blow out a brake line and you have no hydraulic control on your brakes, you pump the pedal and it goes to the floor. The emergency brake, at least as far as I know, and don't take my word for it, do more research, but as far as I know, the emergency brake is more on a cable system, so it's not dependent on the hydraulics. So in a case where if you completely lost your brakes, if you deploy the emergency brake, that should create some friction to slow your vehicle down. Again, people might have some more advice about that. I've never done it, but I've heard about it, so don't take my word for it, do more research. But it could be something that you could kind of file in the back of your mind for, oh yeah, if something terrible should happen, I have another solution. But again, don't take my word for it. Please check into it in more detail. But that's one of the reasons why getting this rear rotor off can be more difficult, is because of these emergency brake shoes are underneath, and the tension on them could be holding, or if you haven't used your emergency, if you're somebody who seldom uses an emergency brake, these can actually rust to the inside of the to the rotor. So just keep that in mind. But I did manage to get it off. I had to use my 8-pound sledgehammer there, and what I did is tapped from the back, kind of pulling it this way, tapping it from the back edge until finally I could get a section of it that the rust would release. And you can see as the amount of WD-40 I had to spray in there to make that happen. It's been years since this one was off, obviously. And I just wanted to show you too, while I have it off, there's the piston pushed all the way back in. So that's now ready to go to put the new pads in there, into the caliper here. So one other thing I did want to mention, let's see if I can find it here quick and easy. Yes. I misspoke slightly when I said that this little nut was held in place by a Torx nut. It's actually an Allen wrench. It's a millimeter size here. I have this handy dandy little set of Craftsman Allen wrenches that I got years ago. I've got a Torx set, I've got a millimeter set, and I've got an English set. So it was just basically removing this, and that's just to hold it in place till you get everything assembled and the wheel is put back on. Obviously the lug bolts hold everything into place. Nothing is going to come off as long as the lug bolts, the wheel, the rotor, any of that assembly, it'll all stay together there. But this is just to kind of hold it in place for you. It it's not real strong, but it's enough to just hold it in place. So my next move then is to start putting all the new stuff on. As I showed you before, there is the new rotor. Now, one of the things that they do at the factory, at least I found with these, I don't know if all of them are like that, they put a light oil on both sides of this. You don't want any kind of oil on your rotor because that's a friction point. You want it to be dry so that when the pads rub against it, it creates friction and slows your vehicle down. So one of the things that I was told to do is, if you have any carburetor cleaner, is just spray that lightly around this edge and that edge, wipe it all off so that you remove any kind of slipperiness that's on this surface. You don't want that, and you've got to be careful with any kind of lubricant and stuff like that, WD-40 or what have you. You don't want anything on either the pads or the rotor. You want them to stick. You want there to be friction. You want them to squeeze against each other and cause it to slow down. And don't worry, the materials they're made out of, they resist heat to, I don't know what the total is, 2,000 degrees or 1,800, whatever it is. It's designed that it can handle that kind of friction when you're braking. But at any rate, yeah, that's just a little tip that'll make things a little easier. Just spray a little bit of that on that surface to remove any kind of oil film that's there, and then you're good to go. See, this isn't stainless steel, so they put the little bit of oil on to make sure that there's no rust if it sits in a warehouse for a while or anything, because who wants to open a box and see, oh, there's some rust on that already, I don't want it. So but as you can see, once they're in use, they rust freely. So, but they're designed to be a temporary part. It's not a permanent part of the car. It's a replacement, what would they call it? Not just a replacement part, but a maintenance part that has to be replaced periodically. So at any rate, let's get the new rotor back on and we can start putting this back together. Alright, sorry about all these short choppy segments here, but I don't have anybody filming with me and I don't have a tripod with me, so I kind of have to do this in between. Now, as you can see, I did manage to get the rotor back on. It was a little snug because of those emergency brake shoes, but I managed to get them in. I got the holes lined up and I managed to get this Allen wrench nut or screw bolt in so it's tight. I also got the bracket put back on there with those two bolts, and I have the two pads are now in place. The one with the teeth on slid into the piston, the inside of the piston, and then the outside pad clips over these ears on the caliper. These ears right here on the caliper. So all I have to do is fold this, turn this over and slide it in here, and then these two slides here, I got to push those back so I can get over the ears there, and then the bolts that go. Let's see if I can show you the bolts. These are the long bolts that slide through from the back and tighten. They fit into these it's hard to see them from there. These are the kind of the pieces of the bracket that are threaded hole that the bolts screw into, and that holds the whole caliper assembly in place. Now, just while I have it here, it's easier to show you this way in case you were wondering exactly how this braking system works. Again, I'm not an expert, but this is my understanding of it. Okay, it's a hydraulic system, so it's a system of hoses with hydraulic oil in it. Not the same as you put in your car engine, of course, but it's a different type of oil. So when you step on your brake pedal, that activates the master cylinder to push, and that's the reservoir inside your engine hood that you check to make sure you're not low on brake fluid. That activates it to push brake fluid out all of the lines, all of the brake lines into the brake hoses to each of the calipers. Now this is a four-wheel disc brake system on this, so it's got this it's got calipers and rotors on all. It doesn't have drums on anywhere like some vehicles do. So what happens at that point is the pressure of this hydraulic fluid coming through this hose pushes this piston forward like it was when we started. Remember, it was sticking out, and then that causes these two brake pads in the caliper to pinch against this turning rotor. This turns with the wheel, of course. And so what happens then is that produces the friction that stops you. And that's the system. Every time you step on the brakes, the hydraulics push through and it squeezes the pads against the rotor. So that's in a sense how a braking system works on vehicles, hydraulic and disc brake system works. So I just thought I'd share that in case somebody was interested. If you didn't know, probably most of you know more about this than I do, but that's just the basics of how it works. Changing your brakes isn't something that you really have to go someplace to get done. If you have some mechanical ability and will invest in a few tools, excuse me, you can do it for about half. I mean, what this cost me for this vehicle, for 4 pads and 2 rotors, that's a 2-wheel brake job, it cost me well under $200 for the materials. And this is a mid-range pad. This isn't the most expensive one, it's not the cheapest one. So that was fine with me. That would do. The rotor, they just had one basic one. If you wanted to go to something more high performance, you can pay all kinds of money. But for less than $200 and a few hours of labor, you probably save yourself at least that much than if you take it to a garage and have a mechanic do it, because you're paying $70 an hour or whatever for labor, and then you got the profit in there for the owner and so on. So it's been years since I've had anybody do brake work for me, so I don't know what the standard rates are right now as far as if they say, oh, we'll do a brake job for $250 or $300 or what have you. I don't know. But I just know that I can do it cheaper myself, and you can do it too. It just takes a little practice, a little patience. Everything has to go together just one way. You can't put it together backwards. It just won't work. And you just have to make sure everything's tightened down properly and so on. And I always, when I'm done, I will pump the brake pedal a few times to make sure. First of all, you got to make sure when you're done you put the cap back on the master cylinder. You don't want to spray hydraulic fluid all over your engine compartment. Brake fluid. So after that's on, then I will start it up, pump the brake pedal a few times to make sure that I've got pressure there. Sometimes you kind of pump up the brakes, you know what I'm talking about. And then I'll take it for a run nearby, and I'll get it up to speed, step on the brakes, get it up to speed, step on the brakes to make sure that everything's working properly. I've never had any trouble if I do that. So that's just a suggestion for you. Again, other people may have other ways of doing this, or even better ways than I do. This is how I was taught, and I pass this along to you if it's something that you would like to do and save yourself some money and be more handy and feel a sense of satisfaction that you can do some of your own work. Then this is how you do it. So I'll come back to you when everything's put back together. Okay, we are all put back together now. Now I want to show you a mistake I made. We learn by doing, right? These pads for this particular vehicle are specific to left and right brakes, and I didn't notice that when I was putting them in. They'll clip on either way, but they just won't attach to the bracket right if you've got them backwards. I had the inside pad correct. That wasn't the issue. The problem was the outside pad that I had on here. This is the one I had on, and as you can see, I had this metal clip facing down, whereas it should be up. Now, how do I know that that's the case? Well, if you look here on this pad, on the one side you have ears that fit in a channel, and on the other side there's only one that it slides in against it. It doesn't fit into. what I had on there before, I didn't realize at first, is I had one top was the 2 and the other pad had just the 1, and I didn't notice that. If I'd have looked a little more closely, I'd have realized, oh, I've got a mix to match set. If you look at this set now, that for the other side, let's see if I can put these where they should be here. Okay. They will fit on the other brake like this being the inside one, and this is your outside pad. If you look here, you see now you got both ends have the 2 lips sticking up, and on this side they each just have the 1. On this one, the 2 lips that connect to the bottom is the way it's supposed to go, and then it just folds into the top, and then this clip helps to hold it in place. I couldn't understand why I couldn't get it all the way in the way it was supposed to go, and then I realized, oh yeah. So I've done others where it wasn't that specific, but this is a different system, so I'm learning. So if you've watched the way I had put the pads in before, realize the outside one was the wrong side one. It had to go on, it goes on the other side. This is the right hand side here. So just keep that in mind. The other thing I should have done is paid more attention when I pulled the old pads off, because this metal clip is unique. It's only on the one side of the one pad. So if I'd remembered, oh yeah, that goes on the top, then I'd realize which was the right and wrong pad to put in. And again, your curvature of your pad here fits the curvature. You don't put them on the opposite way that they would go that way. That doesn't work. So sorry about that, but I think I have it correct now, and I'm ready to put the wheel back on, and then this the right half of my project here is done. So I will probably give a quick wrap up when everything is done. I won't show you step by step with the other brake or the other horn, but I'll give you a quick wrap up when we see everything is done. Okay, so I appreciate you watching, and please subscribe to our channel.